Mordechai Vanunu, born Marrakesh, Morocco, 1953. Family moved to Israel when he was 10. 10 brothers and sisters lived in this house in a poor neighborhood in the desert city of Beersheba. Mordechai's father, Rabbi Shlomo Vanunu, ran a shop for religious articles in the Beersheba open-air market. Mordechai excelled in religious studies at school. Everyone expected him to become a great rabbi and scholar. Drafted into the Israel army, Mordechai abandoned traditional Judaism, served 3 years in a combat unit, was discharged with the rank of first sergeant. Studied philosophy at Ben Gurion University in Beersheba. Active in Arab student organizations, joined the pro-Soviet Israel Communist Party. November 1975, accepted as a technician at the Nuclear Research Center in Dimona. Worked there for 10 years. Dismissed in October 1985, reportedly because of budget cutbacks. Sometime later, Mordechai's brother, Meir, would receive this letter from overseas.
Okay, this is the letter. A very short, dramatic letter from my brother. This is a copy of it.
What does it say?
He's saying something unexpected is going to happen in the future. I want to prepare you for this. This is the matter. I'm going to London to publish all I know about the place called Dimona, with pictures I took there and with my picture. This is what I decided to do because there is no middle way. This is his words, no middle way, or yes or no. And I decided yes. I don't want to write anymore. Good luck, Moti.
How could Mordechai Vanunu have smuggled a camera into Israel's most sensitive and closely guarded complex? How did he succeed in shooting 2 full rolls of film, accumulating over 60 clear photographs of Machon 2, purported to be Israel's nuclear bomb factory? It's hard to believe that this could happen in Israel, which has always been highly security conscious. These questions and others comprise the strange story of Mordechai Vanunu, the renegade Israeli atomic technician who sparked off a worldwide chain reaction. After his dismissal, Vanunu took his severance pay, sold his house and car, and set out to tour the world, films in hand. Vanunu left Israel in November 1985. First, he sailed to Greece, where he'd hoped to obtain an entry visa to India. When his request was rejected, he flew to Moscow via Aeroflot, the Soviet national airline, and there he remained for 2 days, awaiting a connecting flight to the Far East. With the still undeveloped films in his pocket, Vanunu left Moscow for Thailand, Nepal, Singapore, and then Sydney, Australia, arriving in April 1986. He decided to remain there for a while before continuing on to the United States. Although he had enough money to continue his travels, Vanunu decided to take a job as a taxi driver, which helped him become more familiar with the city. The Gothic steeple of St. John's Church overlooks the King's Cross neighborhood, a sleazy district teeming with bars, sex shops, drug addicts and prostitutes. Mordechai's taxi passed through this neighborhood frequently. One evening, Vanunu decided to visit the church. The congregation's enthusiastic young evangelists welcomed the stranger warmly. Mordechai began to attend regularly. The first young fellow to befriend him was David Smith.
I think it was a Friday night.
I was on manning the coffee just outside the church, and Morty was wandering past and wandered into the church. I don't think he'd ever seen a church or been in a church before. Got involved with some of the people in the church. From that point on, kept coming week after that. Got more and more interested.
Worshippers at St. John's Church include missionaries, community workers, reformed criminals, penitents and social misfits. The church owns an apartment block and rents flats to the homeless. This is Mordechai Vanunu's room. His next-door neighbor, Francis, recalls him fondly.
He was a good man to live with, and personally as well, he was a good man to live with because he was a good man. Fill his whole being with your countenance, Father.
Vanunu was attracted to the church's Bible study groups, at which he raised many lofty moral issues.
He'd mentioned his own involvement in the nuclear factory in Dimona. In terms of a commitment to justice and peace, he could be effective in his own way in working for world peace. Father, hear our prayer.
Through Jesus Christ our Lord.
Vanunu's Orthodox Jewish education diametrically contrasted with all that the Anglican Church could offer him. Nevertheless, he chose to be baptized by the Reverend Stephen Gray, and even selected a new name, John Morty.
Amen. And he walked into this office one day and just said, Stephen, I want to become a Christian, I want to be baptized. And so then we very simply went through what that meant to him, and went over to the church and said a prayer, and he committed his life to Christ. And I can remember being surprised that he was fairly articulate in his prayer, and then straight after that he seemed to have a sense that there was something now that he had to do.
When St. John's Church decided to renovate the premises, they engaged several workers, including a certain self-styled Colombian journalist, Oscar Guerrero. Guerrero met and befriended John Morley Vanunu as he was apparently engaged in fence painting. Vanunu told Guerrero about his work at the atomic reactor in Dimona and about the rolls of film he had.
Oscar Guerrero was a very secretive person and didn't share very much with us at all. But because of his expertise, I guess, in journalism, it became a possibility. He obviously knew how to approach the times and things like that.
In June 1986, Oscar Guerrero took some of Vanunu's pictures and flew to Madrid to contact the Sunday Times. He carried with him an impressive portfolio of news photos, which to a discerning eye could be fakes. They show him with Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres, Polish Solidarity leader Lech Walesa, and PLO statesman Issam Sirtawi, later to be gunned down. From Madrid, Guerrero and the Sunday Times correspondent proceeded to London. Guerrero wove an amazing tale, informing the Sunday Times that he'd been to Israel and met with a senior atomic technician named Mordechai Vanunu. Furthermore, Guerrero reported he'd succeeded in smuggling Vanunu out of Israel, carrying details and photographs of Israel's neutron bomb. He asked the Sunday Times for $300,000 for this story, including pictures. The Sunday Times had recently been burned after publishing the Hitler diaries, which it had bought for a small fortune, only to find out that they were forgeries. Consequently, Guerrero was not welcomed with any particular display of enthusiasm. Robin Morgan, editor of Insight, was assigned to investigate the story.
I met Guerrero myself. When he first came to the office, we were all very suspicious. And in fact, we nearly showed him the door. We wanted nothing to do with Guerrero. And yet he had in his possession a set of photographs that were quite obviously the real thing. So we decided at that point to humor Guerrero, and I sent a reporter with Guerrero to Australia to make contact with Mordechai Vanunu.
The reporter assigned by Morgan was Peter Hunham, head of Insight's investigative team, a brilliant journalist with numerous sources of otherwise unobtainable information.
It was decided that I should go to Australia, and when I arrived there, Vanunu was there. He was looking very frightened. He was almost shaking with fright, because I think he obviously didn't know who I was. wasn't sure whether it was safe for him to meet me.
Peter Hunham visited Vanunu in Australia and questioned him daily over a 2-week period, constantly updating London on his progress. Vanunu's responses sounded promising indeed.
We were presented with the possibility of revelation, of a scoop. For 30 years, people have wondered about Israel's nuclear power. They have conjectured, they have speculated. There have been many reports and many books, but no one has ever got close to the truth of Israel's nuclear power.
The truth about Israel's nuclear power may be found here in Dimona, but no official Israeli source has ever confirmed this. However, in December 1960, a crisis erupted in US-Israel relations when American intelligence revealed that what was described by the Israel government as a textile plant in Dimona was actually a large, top-secret nuclear reactor. Back in October 1956, Israel, together with France and England, had invaded the Sinai Peninsula in order to regain, for the West, control of the Suez Canal. France, in turn, agreed to help Israel construct a nuclear reactor. This was due in the main to the special relationship between French leaders and Shimon Peres, then Director General of the Israel Ministry of Defense. The planned 24-megawatt natural uranium reactor could produce several kilograms of plutonium annually, enough for manufacturing a nuclear bomb. The agreement was signed in October 1957 and work began at once. The reactor site in the Negev desert was situated only a few miles away from the new immigrant town of Dimona. Both the town and the reactor were the vision of one man, David Ben-Gurion. In 1952, with the annihilation of European Jewry still fresh in mind, Ben-Gurion established the Israel Atomic Energy Commission, claiming that it was possible for Israeli scientists to accomplish for their own people what Jewish nuclear scientists did for the United States. Dimona, 30 years later, is a small, forgotten desert town with a shortage of employment and various social problems. The town occasionally reaches the headlines because of trouble with the Black Hebrew cult, which has established its base here. Chernobyl, atomic reactors, and nuclear power are hardly topics of daily conversation here in Dimona.
We sent a reporter out there with copies of the photographs who checked the locations from the road, again, the cooling towers, the reactor shell, the position of this tower, for instance. It was obvious that these photographs were taken from a building inside Dimona. So there we have Mordechai Vanunu was there.
The Sunday Times reporter asked Vanunu to accompany him to London to continue the investigation. Mordechai Vanunu packed his few belongings and set out on his way.
It was decided that we should ask Vanunu to come back to England. He was reluctant to come at first, but we explained that we wanted him to be seen by scientists who could check out his story. So we arrived at the airport in Sydney. He was seen off by about half a dozen people from the church, who he'd obviously made friends with.
We drove out to the airport on the day that Mordechai flew to London. And there were a couple of things that we talked about: the fact that he had received, or was going to receive, money for doing what he did, which was a matter of some concern because it can easily be misinterpreted.
When we first met him, we made it quite plain that we were not in the business of buying information and buying stories, that we did not trust information that had to be purchased.
And he said to me, and I do believe him, it might sound naive, but I do believe him, that he wanted to give that money to God's work.
One thing is certain. Whether or not Vanunu was offered any money for the information he possessed, he boarded a plane for London on September the 12th.
Vanunu seemed, happy that he was coming with me, and we had a pleasant flight back. And at the time, there was a telex sent by Australian intelligence to British intelligence saying that I was on the way with Vanunu. And when I arrived at the airport, there were two special branch policemen waiting at the aircraft. They were following us, Vanunu was obviously nervous when we arrived at the airport because he wasn't sure whether there would be any difficulties about him entering Britain. And I went through the customs and immigration separately from him. In fact, he was only held up for about 5 minutes. They just asked him a few questions about whether he could support himself. Well, he had a reasonable amount of dollars on him, so there was no problem about that. He was just saying he was coming as a tourist. And we took him to a hotel in central London to start with.
Vanunu was most uneasy in London. The Sunday Times journalists suspected that British intelligence was passing information to the Mossad, Israel's security services.
Then we took Mordechai to a hotel in the country. We hired a room there for 3 or 4 days, and we debriefed him again with a scientist, Dr. Frank Barnaby of the Swedish Institute of Peace Research, who himself is a nuclear weapons expert.
Having read all the documents, my first impression, my first feeling, suspicion was that this was a Mossad operation, that it was an operation to tell the world, particularly the Arab countries, that Israel did indeed have a nuclear weapon capability without the necessity of a government announcement, which the government would clearly be hesitant to do because an official announcement would have had adverse repercussions in the United States.
The United States denies aid to countries which engage in nuclear testing. However, Israel has never officially announced possession of nuclear weaponry, despite the potential deterrent effect of such a statement amongst her enemies. Israel has not signed any nuclear non-proliferation treaties and does not admit inspection teams into the Dimona facility. Vanunu's photographs may explain why.
Now, this is not a power station. It's not an electricity station. It's not a chemical plant. This was a plutonium production plant. All our scientific experts told us that.
The interesting features of the description by Vanunu and the photographs was evidence of, clearly, obviously, the production of plutonium, but everyone knows that Dimona produces plutonium.
In a nuclear chain reaction, millions of electrons are released, bombarding uranium atoms in the heart of the reactor and creating a new element, plutonium, within the uranium waste. The sophisticated facilities required to separate the two elements require high-level and often top-secret technology.
The general assumption was that Israel had about 20 nuclear weapons of the type that was exploded over Nagasaki. In other words, a fission bomb based entirely on plutonium. From the Vanunu's description about the amounts of plutonium produced in the 10-year period that he worked at Dimona was that Israel had far more than 20 bombs. In fact, probably more than 100, maybe even 150 nuclear weapons, and that they were not of the first generation type that we had assumed, like the Nagasaki bomb, but they included weapons which had a fusion component.
Dr. Barnaby interrogated Vanunu intensively at a country retreat. Vanunu was, after all, only a minor technician, but the bits and pieces of his story began to fall into place. The pictures and the information he provided were especially shocking. The basis of advanced thermonuclear weaponry, in fact, the booster weapon.
And therefore, the first thing that came out of the Vanunu story was that Israel had moved from the Nagasaki-type weapon to the booster-type weapon, and maybe even further, because we know from the story that Dimona is producing lithium deuteride, and that can explode with an explosive power equivalent to 1 million tons of TNT or much more. Now, that explosion would destroy a large city, certainly any city in the Middle East.
The Yom Kippur War. The Egyptian attack in October 1973 caught the Israelis by surprise. Egypt crossed the Suez Canal as Syrian tanks were about to overrun the Golan Heights. Israel's counterattack in the Sinai Peninsula proved to be a failure. This war focused further attention on Israel's nuclear capabilities as the country suffered its most difficult moments. According to Time magazine reports, Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir had ordered the immediate placement of 13 20-kiloton atomic bombs in specially equipped Phantom and Mirage planes.
This people, small as it is, surrounded as it is by enemies, has decided to live. And if we have to pay the price for living, we have to pay it. This is not a people that can give in. And we know that giving up means death, means destruction of our sovereignty and physical destruction of our entire people. We will not be destroyed. We dare not be destroyed.
However, before Israel had a chance to exercise her nuclear option, the situation changed in her favor on both fronts. According to Time, the 13 bombs were sent back to a desert armory, where they remain to this day, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. Many speculations have been raised concerning Israel's bomb in the basement. Why would Israel's leaders desire advanced thermonuclear weaponry if no target in the Middle East warrants its use?
The nuclear scientists who are producing the weapons are out of political control. In other words, the politicians are not controlling what is happening. And of course, those scientists, I mean, all scientists, like to experiment with these things. They like to go as far as they can. I mean, Israeli nuclear weapon designers know that the Americans, the British, the Chinese, the Russians, the French have all designed thermonuclear weapons. And they want to prove to themselves that they can do it.
After Dr. Barnaby had completed his interrogation of Vanunu, the results were submitted to well-known American and British scientists. Vanunu, however, was feeling rather lonely in the rustic atmosphere of the country and asked the Sunday Times to transfer him to London.
This is the area that Vanunu preferred to live in. He had been staying outside London in a country hotel, but the trouble was he wanted a bit of nightlife, and this is an area where there are lots of theatres, restaurants and so on. It's also the sort of area where there are many different nationalities around and where he probably wouldn't be noticed, so it suited us from that purpose, although we would have preferred that he lived outside London, away from anybody.
Vanunu was given room 105 at the Mountbatten Hotel, cautiously using the assumed identity of a Portuguese citizen named Foresti.
We took some of the photographs, we took details of Vanunu's documentation and a summary of the story we were proposing to write to the Israeli embassy.
The Israeli embassy in London confirmed that Mordechai Vanunu had worked at Dimona.
That was on the Tuesday before he disappeared. Now we now know that he met Cindy on the Thursday of that week, and it's possible that the activity by Mossad was stepped up as a result of what information we took to the Israeli embassy.
It was love at first sight. That's what Vanunu may have believed when he met a young American Jewish girl named Cindy on September the 24th.
Well, he apparently told a story that he'd met her in Leicester Square. She'd just been standing there and they'd got talking and went for a coffee. I mean, he was very lonely and he was anxious to have female companionship.
She was blonde, in her 20s, slightly plump, claimed to be an American beauty therapist, and on holiday in London.
Holiday in London. Perhaps that's what Vanunu wanted when he asked the Sunday Times editors to move him from the country to the city. Now, his future was looking rosier. But Oscar Guerrero, who still held some of Vanunu's photographs, didn't give up so easily. One evening, he too turned up in London once again.
Oscar Guerrero then came back to London, alone, and tried to sell the story to other newspapers. Now, naturally, no one believed him.
Guerrero's story was welcomed by the editors of the Sunday Mirror, eager to scoop the Sunday Times. They checked out not only the information, but also Guerrero himself, and found that he was nothing more than a con man on Interpol's lists. The September the 28th edition of the Sunday Mirror bore the banner headline, "The Strange Case of Israel and the Nuclear Conman." Scientists claimed that the photographs could have been taken anywhere, even at a car wash or an egg factory. If the materials used for the manufacture of a neutron bomb were arranged as in Guerrero's pictures, they said, the plant would probably blow sky high. Even before the Sunday Mirror went to print, Vanunu was displaying extreme nervous tension. A bizarre encounter on Regent Street gave him further cause for concern. An old acquaintance from Israel bumped into Vanunu apparently by chance. Vanunu told him what he was doing in London, and the friend promised him that he would do everything he could to get Vanunu back to Israel.
Obviously, Oscar Guerrero running around London trying to make a lot of money out of the story. So it couldn't have helped. It obviously helped to alert the Israelis and Mossad.
Vanunu immediately broke off contact, but realized that he'd been exposed. He no longer trusted the Sunday Times journalists and exercised discretion when discussing his girlfriend, Cindy.
Mordy got very angry that we were interfering in his personal life. We tried to persuade him that this could be dangerous, that it is just possible that she was not an innocent tourist who he'd met. Again, he got very angry and he would not allow us to interfere.
But what made me more suspicious was that he couldn't persuade her to give him her second name, so he only knew her as Cindy, and she wouldn't say which hotel she was staying at.
On Monday, September the 29th, one day after the article appeared in the Sunday Mirror, Vanunu complained to Robin Morgan that the Sunday Times was being overcautious in delaying publication of his story.
He was sat in this office with me on a Monday. He was getting tired of waiting around for the story to appear. He was getting worried and he was getting frustrated, hanging around and waiting. And he wanted to disappear for a few days and he did not want my reporters with him.
And in fact, the next morning, the Tuesday morning, he rang me about 10:30 in the morning to say, yes, he was still going, but he would ring me twice a day. And that was the last we heard of him.
On Tuesday, September the 30th, Vanunu checked out of the Mountbatten Hotel. When he failed to contact them twice daily as promised, the Sunday Times journalists realized that he must have gone underground. When Peter Hunham reached the hotel a week later, he found this note from Cindy to Mr. Foresti.
We're obviously very concerned about it, partly for his own safety, partly because we didn't know whether to run the story. I mean, the man had disappeared, the source of the information had gone. We were hoping that by the time we ran the story, we would have been able to put him into a press conference where he could have answered people's questions and been filmed. That possibility had gone.
The Sunday Times and all other newspapers belonging to press magnate Rupert Murdoch are printed at this fortress-like complex in Wapping. Here, a key witness could have been hidden away even from Israel's Mossad. However, Sunday Times editor was at pains to explain how concerned his paper was for Vanunu's safety. Vanunu, he said, had refused to listen to them.
We're not the CIA. We're not the British police. We're not MI5, MI6. We're not Mossad. We can't imprison him. We're just journalists.
On October the 5th, 1986, Vanunu's story was finally published in the Sunday Times. The front page headline read, "Revealed the Secrets of Israel's Nuclear Arsenal." Israel now ranks as the world's 6th most powerful nuclear power after America, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, and China. Mordechai Vanunu didn't read the story that Sunday, as he was not in London at the time. Apparently, he was, by then, either already in Israel or en route. Vanunu's whereabouts over a 40-day period was one of Israel's best-kept secrets. It was not even clear whether he was alive or dead. How Vanunu got to Israel is even more of a secret. Only a few people knew that he was being held in administrative detention. One of the privileged few to know where he actually was Vanunu's attorney, Amnon Zichroni, known for his support of negotiations with the PLO and his success in acquitting accused security offenders. The first meeting between the two lasted for 6 hours. Where was Vanunu incarcerated? Who investigated him? And how did he get to Israel?
I'm sorry, I cannot comment on that.
Was he kidnapped by the Mossad?
I cannot even confirm that he was kidnapped.
Each question met with the same response.
I cannot comment on that, I'm sorry.
The story of Israel's atomic bomb now gave way to the question of where is Vanunu? Israel denied that she was holding Vanunu, while the press charged that he was kidnapped from England.
Vanunu disappeared. There was a period of perhaps a week or 10 days when no one had any idea where he was. We reported him missing to the British police. There was a considerable political fuss here about him disappearing like this. There were MPs asking questions about it. The Home Secretary was asking questions about it, that something illegal had happened to him.
Speculation abounded. The Vanunu story provided considerable revenue for the press. Questions were raised in the British Parliament as well. Did Israel abduct Vanunu on British soil? Was the British Secret Service involved in the Vanunu affair? Members of Parliament demanded that diplomatic sanctions be imposed on Israel. They expected unambiguous responses from the Foreign Secretary. The Vanunu affair rocked 10 Downing Street as well, and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher requested clarification from her friend Shimon Peres, who had hosted her in Israel a short while before the scandal broke. Peres telephoned Thatcher and assured her that Israel had committed no infraction of British law.
Let us pray.
And in Australia, they prayed for the welfare of John Mordy.
Father God, we give you thanks and praise for the privilege of knowing Mordy, for everything that he means to us, and for everything that he means to you. And we thank you for his courage in standing up for what he believes is true and for making this stand.
A church emissary, the Reverend John McKnight, left Australia for Israel via London in search of Vanunu, whom he called a lost sheep.
The Israeli consulate in London told me that they did not know that Mr. Vanunu was in Israel. Scotland Yard has carried out investigations, and to the best of their knowledge, no person using Vanunu's passport or Vanunu using his passport is recorded anywhere in England, any of the ports or the airports.
The Reverend McKnight left Israel no wiser than he had been when he arrived, as the press continued to speculate on Vanunu's whereabouts.
Then rumours started circulating that he was back in Israel. There was a story that he'd been taken on a boat in the English Channel. There was a story that he was drugged and put on a flight from Paris to Israel, even quoting the flight that he was on. But there were so many stories that it seemed that there was a lot of misinformation.
Mordechai's brother, Asher Vanunu, arrived in Israel from Amsterdam, and Meir Vanunu flew in from Boston. They both suspected that their brother was being held somewhere in Israel, but had no proof.
The simple thing is that Israel has reasons to be afraid not to let my brother talk.
Israel continued to deny that she was holding Vanunu, until the bold reporter suddenly discovered Vanunu's name on a police list of prisoners to be brought before a magistrate for an extension of remand. Pressures mounted on the Israel government. The big secret had already been leaked by the press, but the censor forbade its publication. On November the 9th, 1986, 6 weeks after Vanunu disappeared, the government of Israel finally announced Mordechai Vanunu is under lawful detention in Israel, in the wake of a court order which was issued following a hearing at which the lawyer he chose was present. The indictment in the case of the State of Israel versus Mordechai Vanunu included charges of severe espionage and treason, entailing 2 sentences of life imprisonment.
He who passed secret information without authorization with the intention to arm state security. The punishment again is maximum life imprisonment.
Ashkelon prison has 550 inmates, 525 of whom were convicted on security charges. Vanunu was held here in solitary confinement with closed-circuit television cameras trained on him and the light on for 24 hours a day. One day a week, on Sundays, as fate would have it, Vanunu's family could visit him for half an hour. However, they had to sign an affidavit of secrecy, violation of which could entail 15 years imprisonment.
He is not free to talk about three things: about his job in Dimona plant, and about the way he was brought to Israel, and about his motivation.
Mordechai's letters were first read by the censor, who added his own contributions. In one letter, Mordechai wrote, "Am I a prisoner of the Shin Bet? They have good reason to take revenge on me. The whole truth about the Shin Bet's function in this country has not yet been published. The Shin Bet, Israel's internal security services." Chana Koren, a well-known Israeli graphologist, provided us with an insight into Vanunu's personality situation. We presented her with two handwriting samples, one written by Vanunu several years ago, and one taken from his letters sent from prison. To ensure an objective analysis, we did not reveal the subject's identity. We asked her to tell us about the man behind the handwriting, both before and after a specific experience he'd underwent. We wanted to understand what happened to him after he left Israel.
This is the handwriting from before, where we can see a very lonely man, feels rejected, extremely sensitive, very intelligent, very sharp, but not well developed from his emotions side. He has a very good memory, pays a lot of attention to details, but cannot see the whole picture, or he loses his view in the details.
The second letter was written in prison.
This one looks like it is almost not the same person, if it is the same one. Like he's more quiet now, like he completed his mission. He feels much better in his skin now than he felt here.
Mordechai asked a guard for a pen. The unsuspecting policeman agreed, and Vanunu secretly wrote this halting message on his palm. Vanunu M. was hijacken in Rome, Italy. 30th, 9th, 86, 2100. Came to Rome by BA Fly 504. Vanunu's guard sat upright and didn't even notice what was happening. Numerous journalists and photographers filmed the incident from beginning to end, but were let down when the censor permitted publication only after the photos had been doctored. The next time Vanunu left the courthouse, his guards were more alert, holding his hands for added security. This weird scene of Vanunu with his hand pressed against the window seems so perfect a scoop as to almost have been staged. Could the security services have really blown it once again? Or could the whole incident have been planned in advance with Vanunu's collaboration just in order to placate British public opinion?
I'm not detective. I'm not writing detective stories or espionage stories. So imagination is absolutely free.
Berkeley Street, London. We approached the Thomas Cook travel agency, following a tip from Peter Hunem. This scene was filmed with a hidden camera.
And the departure date was what?
30th of September.
30th of September. And it was a flight to where?
To Rome.
To Rome.
On British Airways.
Oh, was he?
The person that went with him was Cindy.
All right, just bear with me 2 minutes,
Thank you.
please.
The British travel agents were polite as usual, even though our request placed them under some pressure. Eventually, we realized that Mr. Hoonham's hunch was correct.
Right, basically, you need to speak to John Davis.
So he will tell you anything that he's prepared to tell you.
The stamp of Thomas Cook Limited appears on a British Airways ticket, dated September the 30th, 1986, issued to Mr. M. Vanunu, assigned to seat number 6F. Alongside him, in 6E, was Miss C. Khanin. Could Miss C have been Cindy? 2 Sunday Times reporters saw Cindy with Vanunu briefly. They described her to an artist who drew a likeness which was later published in the press.
We have tried to find Cindy Khanin using many, many, many methods of investigation. We have found 155 Cindy Khanins around the world, but so far not one of them checks out as the woman, Cindy Khanin, in London, who disappeared with Mordi in Rome.
Cindy and Mordechai knew each other only 6 days before the fateful flight. Mordechai and Cindy left London on September the 30th. Their plane to Rome probably had other interested passengers of whom Vanunu was unaware. It landed at Fiumicino Airport just outside Rome at 6:30 p.m. Italian border control officials do not keep entry and departure lists, something which explains why Rome may have been chosen as a convenient site for the abduction. Vanunu wrote 2100 or 9 p.m. on his palm, which would, theoretically, have left enough time to pick up his luggage and to avoid leading a trail. There was also enough time to drug a person and conceal him as diplomatic cargo. However, Fiumicino is one of the best guarded airports in Europe. The possibility of an illegal abduction having taken place here was most disturbing to the Italian authorities. In room 305 on the 4th floor of Rome's Piazza Claudio Hall of Justice, Judge Domenico Sica began investigating the issue. He refused to be photographed and only allowed us to film the building from the outside. However, he did admit that 8 months after the event, he was still totally in the dark. There are no records of entries or departures, he told us, neither of Mordechai Vanunu or of Cindy Khanin, nor any signs of vehicle rental or hotel registration. But Judge Sica's main preoccupation is international terrorism. Ironically, Italian Defense Minister Spadolini had recently visited Shimon Peres in Jerusalem, recalling the special cooperation on this issue between their respective countries. Nightlife in Rome begins at about 9 p.m. or 2100 hours. If Mordechai Vanunu actually arrived here on the night of September the 30th, it's doubtful if he had any taste of the Dolce Vita. Defying warnings by the Israeli Secret Service, and thus risking up to 15 years imprisonment should he ever return to Israel, Meir Vanunu claims that his brother told him he had been lured to Rome by Cindy, who promised there to submit to his advances. But instead, on reaching an apartment, he was set upon by 2 Israeli secret agents, and Cindy herself injected him with a powerful anesthetic. He later woke up to find himself at sea en route to Israel. This is the fishing village of Fiumicino, located 5 minutes from the airport. It has a yacht marina and enjoys a breathtaking sunset. Towards evening, the town is quiet with little traffic. Judge Sika told us that no yacht was registered as leaving Fiumicino Harbour on the 30th of September. However, when we visited Fiumicino on 2 occasions, we saw no evidence of any registration of vessels. It would be none too difficult for anyone to rendezvous at sea with an Israeli ship. As far as the authenticity goes of Meir Vanunu's version, several questions remain unanswered. Why the stress on the hour 2100, 9 p.m.? Why the stress on the British Airways flight number? And why no mention of Cindy? And above all, why is Vanunu himself petitioning Israel's Supreme Court for details of just how he was kidnapped?
I would say that he knows most of the facts. I have the feeling that sometimes I know more than him, but...
Does he know how he was kidnapped?
I cannot comment on that. I cannot even confirm that he was kidnapped.
So there is a possibility that he came with his own will?
I told you, I cannot comment on that.
Zichroni began accumulating all available information on Israel and the atom. His defense line is based on the claim that Vanunu told the Sunday Times nothing new. However, as he was preparing his defense brief, Zichroni received a dismissal notice from Vanunu and his family.
One of the reasons was that my connections with the authorities are, to their estimation, close, intimate, and maybe that's the reason.
The State of Israel demands a trial behind closed doors. The judges, too, must be sworn to secrecy. The prosecution wants Vanunu to attend the trial and not to open his mouth, barred from revealing the details of his abduction. Vanunu's new defense attorney is Avigdor Feldman.
The government is kind of trying to do the impossible, to find him guilty and not to reveal whether he is guilty in giving any valuable information to the public. So it's a very difficult prosecution case.
Vanunu is believed to be sitting behind the covered windows of this police van. Considerable efforts are being made to isolate him. Israel hopes that the media will forget the issue. However, Vanunu has many supporters throughout the world. Members of the Australian and British parliaments, of the Russell Institute, and various others have nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize, and the Norwegian Nobel Prize Committee has approved his candidacy only for 1988. However, it's somewhat difficult to perceive Vanunu as a local hero or a prophet despised in his own land. At Ben Gurion University, in his hometown Beersheba, we couldn't find even one student, Jew or Arab, who supported Vanunu. They all consider him a traitor to his homeland.
Horrible. It's crime, more than crime.
It's very bad.
I despise him.
In the Beersheba market, where Mordechai's father's religious article shop is located, people recoil when discussing Mordechai Vanunu. He shamed his family, they say. Even others named Vanunu, who were not related to Mordechai, are abashed by the incident. Mordechai's father, Rabbi Shlomo Vanunu, says that his son must atone for his sins. As a result of the actions of a technician from Dimona, worldwide speculation remains rampant. Many questions unanswered. Was Israel perhaps interested in unofficially announcing her status as a nuclear power?
I always have that suspicion in the back of my mind because I personally believe that it would be that some strategists in Israel will argue that it's to Israel's security interest that the Arabs know that Israel has a large nuclear deterrent.
Will the true identity of Cindy ever be revealed? And if so, by whom? There are even more queries on which the files cannot yet be closed. How did journalist Oscar Guerrero, who had apparently interviewed Israel's Prime Minister and other dignitaries, come to be fence painting in Australia?
I don't know. I really don't know. But he wouldn't appear to be. And I guess really an agent, worthwhile being an agent, wouldn't appear to be an agent. They don't get round with black suits on and hats pulled down over their heads.
How could Mordechai Vanunu have smuggled a camera into Israel's most sensitive and closely guarded complex? Why was he given security clearance and allowed to work at the reactor if the security services knew of his pro-Palestinian activities? What did he do for 2 days in the Soviet Union with the undeveloped films in his bag? Did perhaps copies of these photographs remain in Moscow's hands? Will all this remain yet another security enigma?
It probably is just a curious coincidence that Guerrero managed to find out about his knowledge of Dimona and set off to Europe to exploit it. He would have been fairly happy to have remained in Australia and working as a taxi driver and picking up a new life there.
World opinion remains divided regarding the chain reaction triggered by nuclear technician Mordechai Vanunu. For the Sunday Times, the Vanunu affair was a good headline story. But for Israel, it was a simple case of treason.